We live in unprecedented times. Words like social distancing and stay-at-home orders are now part of our vocabulary and everyday language. I'm Tom DeVries, and I'm president of the Global Leadership Network, and the Global Leadership Network is here to help you, especially in these times when leadership matters, and it matters now more than ever. We'd like to invite you to this special edition of the GLS Next event, and are excited to have GLN champion Craig Groeschel, who's the pastor of Life Church, be able to talk about leading through crisis. Originally, this was going to be a coaching call that was going to be exclusively for Canada, but now we've made it bi-national, and we appreciate being able to have both Canadian and U.S. audiences as part of our GLN family today. When Craig and I were together 4 weeks ago tonight, we were sharing dinner in Germany. And who would have known that one of the speakers at the German GLS summit ended up coming and testing positive for the coronavirus. It led us to 14 days in quarantine, Craig in the U.S. and me in Germany, and we texted each other each day. And so we've lived a part of this experience together. And as Craig shares about leading through crisis, he knows that what that means at a very personal level. We're also at the end of Craig's talk going to have a time for question and answer. You'll find on your screen a place to submit questions. As things come up during the talk, please feel free to send those in. We have a team that's going to compile those things, and we'll begin to ask those questions later at the end of Craig's talk. Craig, we're so grateful for this time together, for your wisdom and teaching and encouragement and inspiration in the challenges that we face in these times. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about leading through crisis?
Well, thanks, Tom, and I'm glad you didn't get sick, and welcome back. And I do want to welcome all of our leaders today from Canada and from across the United States, and to my Canadian friends, thanks for letting the Americans join you today. As Tom said, this event was really designed for you in Canada, but based on what we're kind of going through, we thought we'd broaden it and try to speak to as many leaders and really create a community where we can learn from each other and dialogue about leading through crisis. We did have, interestingly enough, kind of another subject. What I was going to talk to you was about trying to grow your organizations, and my title was Defeating the Four Enemies of Growth. The problem is, number one, right now, hardly anybody's thinking about growing. We're thinking about surviving. And the other thing is I missed the fifth enemy. The four enemies of growth, I had four. I did not predict COVID-19, which is kind of a really bad joke. But the truth of the matter is nobody predicted this coming along, or at least nobody that I know. And I want to start by acknowledging right now that this is a really, really difficult time all over the world. And I know so many people in my church that are really worried about their jobs. Some people are worried about being sick. So a lot of people have lost their jobs. And I just want to kind of speak to you all and know that many of you, or most of you, you're concerned even at a different level. You're not just thinking about your job, but a lot of you are thinking about all of the jobs of the people that you help oversee, or that you lead in your company or your nonprofit or your church. And the weight of leadership right now that you feel is enormous. You feel the responsibility to try to make wise decisions, and the reality is we just don't have a lot of information, and whatever information we have in this moment is changing really, really quickly. And so it kind of raises the question, how do we lead in a time of crisis? How do we lead when the world is uncertain? How do we lead when the stock market is like, it's all over the place? How do we lead when we're a little bit afraid? How do we lead when we're completely unsure of what to do? And so what I want to do over the next few minutes is just talk about, first of all, a little perspective, and then I want to give you some thoughts around a couple of subjects. Then I'm going to stop and talk about whatever you want to talk about. So you can communicate your questions in whatever form that you have, and then we'll spend a lot of time really trying to dive into some things that may be more specific to where you are. But let's just talk about how do we lead in uncertain times when there is a crisis. We know that leadership is always, always, always important. It's more important in this moment than it has been in most seasons in most of our lifetime. So let's start with a little bit of perspective. And I just want to acknowledge and say what is obvious, but this is a very real global crisis. At the same time, I want to take a step back and also acknowledge this is not the first massive crisis in the history of the world, and it's also not going to be the last. When we look just throughout the thousands and thousands and thousands of years, there's been all sorts of really, really difficult challenges. And I just want to remind myself and say to you all, we will get through this. We will get through this. Something I started doing 5 years ago, I tried to journal for years, but I never could, I'd start and I'd stop, I'd start and I'd stop. And I got a 5-year journal, and I journal 4 lines a day. And then what happens is, what day is today? March what's the date, Lori? 25th. I can't even keep track. I know we're in March 25th. I can look at what I write today, March 25th, 2020. I can also see what happened March 25th, 2019, and 2018, 2017, 2016. What this has done is going and looking at my journal year over year is it's taking me out of day to day and helping me think year to year. And I know that on March 25th, 2021, we will have somehow, some way, come out on the other side of this. So I'm not just thinking day to day, but I'm thinking a year from now, 6 months from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now. 5 years from now, we're going to be talking about remember 2020. We will get through this. And I just want to remind you and take some confidence in this. How will we get through this? I don't know. Someone will find a cure, someone will find treatment, someone will find prevention. The weather will help us out. We'll become more immune. Whatever it is, there's some way we will get out of this. The economy, it's likely to be tough. Economies go up, economies go down, economies tend to recover, and it could be a really difficult season, but I promise you we will come out of this. Let's remember that. Let's also think about this as we look about this crisis. It's really important to remember that every major crisis creates unexpected problems. You know this. You're like, duh, of course. You've got a list of problems in your business a mile long. How do we keep people employed? How do we create revenue when the doors are shut? How do we innovate in the middle of a difficult time? How do we recreate ourselves? And the list goes on and on and on and on. This is obvious. Every major crisis creates unexpected problems, but we also need to remember this. Leaders, don't forget it. Every major crisis also creates unprecedented opportunities. Please don't forget that. When you look at the world today, there are more and different problems today than a month ago. And at the same time, we have to acknowledge as leaders that there are more and different opportunities today than a month ago. And so as leaders, what are we going to do? We are going to try to address the problems. We're going to try to solve the problems. We're going to try to bring wise leadership to the problems. But at the same time, we're not going to overlook and not going to acknowledge that there also would be very significant opportunities. And I want to talk just briefly about the opportunities, just so we can get out of problem mode where I'm in 99% of my day and remember to come up above some of the problems and to look for some opportunities. I'll talk about 3 different types of opportunities as leaders that we should be looking for. The first type, some opportunities are practical by nature. Some are very practical. In other words, some of you right now have an excuse to make some of the changes that you should have made months ago. They were there, you knew that you probably should have made the adjustments, but now because of what's going on, you actually have a very real reason to come in and make the changes that you should have made. I had a mentor who always would tell me, Craig, whatever you do, don't ever waste a crisis. Whenever there's a crisis, make sure you use that as a time to do the things that are the right things that maybe you should have done earlier, and there's some opportunities that are practical. What's interesting is there were some things you probably should have addressed earlier, but it was a little bit confusing, a little bit gray. And here's what we know. What's confusing during good times becomes clear during bad times. In other words, a crisis often creates clarity. You know that. Right now, there are some things that are very clear to you that you need to do today that were not clear a month ago. A crisis often creates clarity. And the reality is it might become very clear to you right now that we need to adjust expenses. We need to eliminate fluff. We need to close a department. We need to redeploy a lot of staff members from one department to another department. We need to narrow our focus. There are opportunities, if you have eyes to see, some of them are practical. Secondly, we also have another category of opportunities. Some opportunities are financial. In other words, if you're one of the people today that do have cash on hand, you do have financial margin, that will create investing opportunities. that will create business opportunities. We were, as a church, negotiating on several pieces of land. We've stopped negotiating. The price for that land is about to go down, most likely, and that will create buying opportunities if we're able to come out of this on the other side. The other end of the financial opportunities that I hope you'll remember is this, that whatever business, whatever organization, those who see needs and respond quickly can create value. If you, all of a sudden there's new needs in front of you, if you can print toilet paper and get it shipped, you've got an opportunity. There's new needs today in the lives of people all over the world. There's global needs, there's local needs. If you can see them, if you can respond really quickly, you can add value, you can create businesses, you can expand ministries. So some opportunities are practical, some are financial. Many opportunities are what I would call missional. And this is obvious for those of you that lead churches or lead nonprofits. But for my business friends, I want you to remember that what you do Monday through Friday, it really does matter, and it can matter even more right now to make a difference, because there are more people in need today than there were a month ago, which means there's new needs and there's new opportunities. As a pastor, I know that people have physical needs, but I also know that there are many people that are more open spiritually today than they were a month ago. And so I'd be crazy not to see that as an opportunity to speak into the lives of people that may have been more closed off before. It's an opportunity for our churches to be missional. Also, I love what businesses are doing, and many of you may kind of fall into this category. You're looking at what do you have, and how can you use it to make a difference? Like General Motors and Tesla, I read, might jump in. Maybe they already are doing this to help make respirators. Commercial airlines that normally transport people are now transporting cargo. There's a local company that I heard about that they have a big trucking department that is not as busy right now, and so they're using their trucks to ship grocery and food and supplies to places that can't get the supplies fast enough. Churches are doing the same thing. We've got 34 different physical locations. We've opened up some of ours to provide childcare for some of the hospital workers that now their children can't go to the normal places. And so we were doing some things while we were allowed to house them, or opening up parking lots to become a testing center. Bottom line is this, that this whole challenge has created some practical opportunities, some financial opportunities, and some missional opportunities. And just in the middle of the problems that we're all dealing with, let's remember every crisis creates problems and opportunities. Most people just see the problems, but the leaders address the problems and seize the opportunities. Now, let's continue to talk about perspective for a minute, and then we'll talk about how we communicate. As leaders, one of the things I want to do is just kind of beg you to make sure you clearly define the problems that you're trying to solve. And I've got a lot of my friends I'm working with, and what I think is happening is a lot of the leaders are more in reactive mode than proactive mode. In other words, whatever problem is screaming the loudest, they're trying to address, instead of stepping back and looking at this whole thing and saying, what are the biggest issues that we need to address today? Let's not just dive in and react. As much as we can, let's be proactive and not just reacting to the problems. For example, we'll just walk through a little exercise. What are our current problems? A person on the street would say, number one, COVID-19 is our problem. We don't want to get sick. We don't want people that are vulnerable to get sick. We don't want people to die unnecessarily. Yes, that is a problem. But as leaders, we have to look at the underlying problems that are equal in our world, or for some people, maybe even greater. A secondary problem we have to acknowledge is that fear and panic, those are problems. Those are very, very, very real problems. I heard one person say we've actually got two pandemics. We've got a viral pandemic and we've got a social pandemic. In other words, people are spreading a virus, and socially, people are spreading fear. Everyone is spreading fear. And fear is a massive problem. In many ways, some people could argue that the fear is creating more problems, or at least compounding the problems, because people are maybe overreacting in some areas, and the fear is now causing all sorts of complications. We have to name that. The third thing that is very obvious, I don't care where you live, I don't care what industry you're in, the cascading economic impact, that's a problem. it's a massive problem. And I know that every single one of you, to whatever degree you are feeling that today, some of you more than others, and my heart is breaking for you for some of the decisions that you're having to make right now, especially when it comes to good people that you can't continue to employ. That's just the reality of where we are. This is one of the hardest facets of leadership, but the cascading economic problem is a massive problem. Some people are projecting that the physical pain and trauma may be worse from the economic impact than it would be from the virus. If you ask me my opinion, that's above my pay grade, so I can't project. But what I do know, as the economy falls, despair rises, and a really bad global economy leads to depression and to mental health challenges and substance abuse, potential domestic abuse, the potential of the rise in people taking their own lives. And then if you project out into the struggling countries, the developing nations that are already impoverished, living on $3 a day or $4 a day, the hit to them with a global economic crisis could be devastating. And the physical pain of people's lives being taken by the virus is real. The physical pain of a real struggling economic is a very, very real issue that we have to address. So are those our problems? There's another thing that's going to impact most of you, and we need to name this, and we need to be aware of it, and we need to talk about it in our leadership circles, and that is public perception is a very real issue. For example, I told you we lead 34 different churches, and I think it was 2 Sundays ago, the majority of our communities, we would have been allowed to meet publicly. We had some states, New York was off limits, Kansas was off limits, Oklahoma was open, and a lot of our campuses, we could have had church. What we had to wrestle with is this. Okay, at the time, I think there were 2 cases in my home state. Would it have been safe to gather? Very likely it would have been incredibly safe. Based on the public perception, if we as a church communicate, we value our gathering over keeping people safe and alive, that's a very real issue. What's right is that we probably could have met. It's correct and true, we probably would have been safe. But even though what we could have done at that moment seemed to make very logical sense, if we're not aware of public perception, we could be having a real challenge. So what's going to happen in the upcoming weeks, somewhere along the way, you're going to have to make a decision. When do you reopen? How do you reopen? What message do you send? It'll also be to your team members. Are they going to feel safe to come back? And so we have to kind of really clearly define those things. Now, those are issues that we're all dealing with. Then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to dive into your own specific area and talk about really, we call them the 4 tiers of effectiveness. Tier 1 is the top tier, and this is what is absolutely missional critical. Tier 2 is what's very strategic and important. Tier 3 is what's helpful but not essential. And tier 4 is what is externally initiated. Maybe good, but it's externally initiated. These tier 4s are incredibly important. Right now, there's going to be a lot of tier 4s. My phone is ringing, binging, tinging with a million invitations to join this prayer circle and this initiative and go online and do this and be a part of this broadcast, blah, 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 blah. Those things are good, but they are tier 4. In other words, they are someone else's top priority. They are not ours. As a leader right now, what you want to do is you want to clearly define your tiers. Tier 1 is absolutely mission critical. You want to devote the vast majority of your time to addressing tier 1 issues. For us, it's how do we put together something that resembles a worship service this weekend? That's tier 1. We've got to keep people connected. I've got 100,000 people that are spread out. We used to be in 34 sites. Now we're in tens of thousands of sites. We need to work really, 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 really hard to minister to these people, to keep them connected. That's tier 1. Tier 2 would be what I'm doing right now. This is incredibly important, but listen, if I'm not doing tier 1, I'm not looking into this camera talking to you right now, because that's tier 2. Tier 3 is going to be some things that, add value, but they are not incredibly strategic. Tier 4 is what everybody else wants you to do. I want to beg you right now to please do everything you can to stay in tier 1 and tier 2. You're going to have 1 billion people coming up with tier 4 ideas. Your team, they're going to be spinning up good ideas because they're good people. Don't fall victim to good ideas. Do everything you can to focus on the mission critical things. Stay up in the tier 1 things. What we're going to do is we're going to start devising a plan. You're going to devise a plan. Once you identify the problem, you're going to create a short-term plan. During this season, and I would consider this to be quarter number 1, most likely, meaning we're early into this crisis. Eventually, the curve will flatten, eventually we'll start meeting, and then eventually we'll start recovering. We're in quarter number 1 right now. This is early on. It should be really, really clear to you what's mission critical right now. That's your focus. That's your priority. That's your drive. That's your mission. That's what takes up the most of your time. What we're going to do is we're going to create a plan, a short-term plan around these most mission critical things. 2 big thoughts. When you're devising a plan, number 1, and I hope this frees you, number 1, expect to get it wrong. However good your plan is, it's not right. There's no way it's going to be right because there's no roadmap. You're going to have lots and lots of false starts. Things are changing too quickly. Just take the pressure off. What we're going to do is say, hey, this is the plan as of what we know right now. And just tell your team, we're not going to get it right necessarily. We're going to be changing. We're going to be adapting. Expect to get it wrong. Do not put the pressure on yourself to say, I know it all. This is how we're going to survive. Expect to get it wrong. Number 2, I would suggest that you think long-term, but limit your plans to short-term. Think long-term. For example, it's funny to me, people are asking me, hey, how long do you think this is going to last? Like, I'm a pastor, man. I got no clue whatsoever. I got no idea whatsoever. I could tell you my opinion, and that's all it is. I've got no idea. Here's what I'm thinking in my mind. I've got a lot of pastors who are saying, hey, hopefully we're going to meet by Easter, okay? Yeah, I hope for Easter, but in my mind, what I'm thinking is hey, we probably won't be meeting until late summer. Now, is that what I really think? What I really think is I got no idea whatsoever. But in my mind, I'm thinking that I've got to figure out how to do church online long-term so I might be pleasantly surprised, not consistently devastated. If I'm thinking we might meet next weekend, I'm going to be devastated. Oh, so disappointed. If I'm thinking we're going to meet Easter, disappointed again. So in my mind, I'm bracing myself emotionally and saying this is going to be a long, drawn-out battle. But in my planning, I'm not making a single long-term declaration anywhere. I haven't told our church or told our staff I'm planning as if we're going to do this through summer. What I'm saying to our staff is we don't make any decisions that last for longer than a week. Every time someone comes out and says, we're not going to be doing whatever for 3 weeks, I just want to scream, don't do that. Why? Okay? If at all, in whatever area you control, I would suggest keep it week to week, sometimes day to day, sometimes hour by hour. Because every time I turn on the TV and watch my local governor or watch my president make some statement, it's a very different day than it was the day before. Every time I look at the stock market, the mood is incredibly different. Depressed, maybe a little more optimistic, more depressed, a little optimistic. It's all over the place. So what we want to do as leaders is we're going to brace ourselves thinking, as a leader, we're going to be wise to think kind of worst case scenario. This could drag out, this could be bad, this could be a real economic hit, but I'm not going to create fear and I'm not going to project out long term. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, we're nimble, we're quick, we're going to make adjustments, we're going to pivot on a dime. There's nothing that is a long-term plan. We'll pivot tomorrow. We'll pivot the next day. In fact, I've done a couple little things where I've intentionally made hard pivots that weren't even real necessary, so the team will know that we're pivoting. We're not building trenches. We're not locking in. We're going to think long-term, but we're going to plan short-term. Let's talk communication, and then we'll get into your questions. How do you communicate as leaders? Let me give you 3 thoughts about communicating. The first thing, number 1, is as a leader, what you're going to do in whatever sphere, business, nonprofit, ministry, you're going to communicate empathetically. You're going to show empathy because unfortunately, most of your team members are not waking up thinking about your company. They're not thinking about your business. They're not waking up thinking about, oh my gosh, how's our church going to be? What they're waking up thinking about is, how is this going to impact my family? How stable is my job? That's what they're thinking about. So what you want to do is you want to acknowledge their fears and you want to speak directly to them. You want to help your team know that you understand what they're feeling. And I would just encourage you, don't even be afraid to say what they might be thinking. In other words, they might be thinking, what if I lose my job? And so you can get up and just say, what I know is some of you right now, you're worried about your job. And then you can just speak very truthfully to that situation, meaning, and that's a real concern. And what I want you to know is I wake up thinking about your job even before you do, because my goal as a leader is to do everything I can to value you as employees. Or you might even acknowledge, based on our current economic situation, that's a very, very real concern. And what I want you to know is we're going to do everything we can to save as many jobs as we can. And if we do have to make transitions, we're going to give you lead time, and we're going to do everything we can to be generous with the team members. I mean, we're just going to put it out there and go right into what they're feeling. Communicate with deep, sincere empathy. Speak into their fears and help them understand that you understand what they're feeling. They will not follow you if they think that you don't understand. Number one, communicate empathetically. Number two, communicate truthfully. And this is so important. What I want to do is just encourage you to tell the truth, even if the truth is negative, even if the truth is filled with uncertainty, even if the truth is really, really scary. And this is really important. I've got some of my pastor friends that I watch them like on Instagram, like, it's going to be fine. It's going to be over in no time. Just have faith. Our God's going to come through for us. And I'm kind of thinking, you're trying to motivate people through this. As leaders, we don't motivate through a crisis. We lead through a crisis. This is not a time for motivation. This is a time for wise decisions. This is a time to lead through a crisis. So you're going to be very realistic. And I like what Jim Collins writes about in his classic book, Good to Great. Jim Collins, I heard him years and years ago at the Global Leadership Summit. He writes about Admiral Jim Stockdale, who was the highest ranking U.S. military officer, who was in one of the worst prisoner of war camps during the Vietnam War. This amazing hero survived an 8-year imprisonment when he was tortured 20 times. You torture me once, I'll probably tell you everything you want to know. I'm just a big wimp like that. This guy was an amazing rock. The whole time he was imprisoned, he had no certainty of living, no promise of freedom, no hope of surviving. And even though he was a prisoner, he was also in command. And so he was trying to save others. And that was his goal. When he got out, they asked him, what was the difference between those who survived and those who didn't? And he said, very quickly, he said, oh, it's easy. Those that didn't survive, they were the optimists. Those who thought, yay, we're going to be out here by Christmas and with our families, or then we're going to be out by Easter, they couldn't take the devastation. That's why what we're going to do as leaders is we're going to speak truthfully. Tell your team the truth, even if it's negative, even if it's uncertain, even if it's scary, because people can handle bad news better than no news. And the fear that comes from not knowing. They would rather you get up and say, here's where we are, revenue's down 35%, and it's not looking good, and we're going to have to make some changes. They would rather hear you say that directly than to act like everything's fine, and then you do layoffs 2 weeks from now. Tell them when you're not sure, I'm not sure. Tell them when you don't know, whatever. The only thing you're going to promise them, let's not make promises, the only thing that you're going to promise them is that we're going to make wise decisions and adjust a lot. We're going to adjust. We're going to pivot. We're going to be ready. We don't know what's coming, but what I promise you is I have faith in our leaders. Our leaders are going to make good decisions based on what we know. Our decisions are not going to be right. We're not making long-term promises, not long-term declarations. When we speak, we're going to speak confidently, but not definitively. We're not making promise. We're confident. We're calm. We are composed. We're not up there crying like, oh, this is the end of the world and I lost, 30% of my retirement a day. No, we're doing the same. We're leaders. This is really, really, really bad. It's really, really, really complicated. And I thank God we have really, really good leaders. And we're going to make wise decisions and we're going to lead our way through this. You just tell your team those types of things. Communicate emphatically, truthfully, frequent. And then the third thing is this, and then we'll do some questions. And I've got some wrap-up thoughts at the end. But the third thing we're going to do is we're going to communicate frequently. Frequently, 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 frequently. You cannot over-communicate, okay? Every day, things are changing, sometimes by the hour. So that means that your team and or your customers and or your church members, whatever your industry, every day they have new questions, every day they have new concerns, every day they have new fears. Communicate frequently. For example, our staff at Life Church, we have about 800 staff members in the different states. We gather together 4 times a year at all the time, 4 times a year. What we're doing now is I'm talking to them weekly. every week they're getting frequent communication from me, sometimes twice a week. A week ago, we did a Q&A with them and a direct communication and a bazillion emails, communicate. Our church normally meets on the weekends, and then we do small groups. So right now we're doing online weekends, plus we're doing virtual small groups, plus we added a midweek worship experience online because we're trying to increase the touch points and the communication. We imagine this, at all of our campuses, our campus staff team, their goal is to call every single church member. Every single one is getting a personal phone call from a staff member asking, how can we pray for you? Do you need anything? Do you need toilet paper? Do you need us to go pick up stuff for you if you're elderly and you can't get out? And so what we're doing is we're increasing the frequency of the communication. Now, when you communicate something, as often as you can, tell them why. For example, at the beginning of this, Tom told you this was going to be for Canada, and he said, but because of what happened, we've decided to broaden it. What did he do? He gave you the why behind the what. Your team, whenever they understand the why, they're more likely to go along with the what. The truth is, you're going to be making a lot of decisions that make sense to you because of the information that you have. But your team may not have that information. And that's why what you want to do with them is you want to be really, really clear on here's the why behind what we're doing. I've got a few more notes that I want to talk about at the end. And I want to give you a little bit of encouragement. Quick side note, just that you probably know this, but just a couple of quick side notes would be this. Cash is king right now. Do everything you can to cut expenses, ramp up on financial margin. We don't know how long this is going to last. We don't know how bad it's going to be. Cash to your business is like oxygen to your body. So your leaders, I kind of feel silly telling you that, but we know that wherever you can, build up cash. If your team's going to need to make sacrifices, what are we going to do as leaders? We're going to go first, and we're going to sacrifice the most. That's what we're going to do. If everybody's taking a 20% pay cut, I'm taking 40%. If we're not sure when we're going to do it, I'm doing it today. I'm not asking my team to do it for a month from now. I'll go first. I'll cut the most. And this may seem obvious, but I just want to say it, and I want to say it as lovingly and as directly as I can. You got to take care of yourself. You got to take care of yourself. And if I sat down with some of you right now and we sat across from each other over a cup of coffee, you had coffee and I had my tea, and you asked me how I was doing, if you leaned in and pressed enough, I might start crying. And for some of you, you're in the same place, meaning you are using every bit of faith and energy you have to try to stand strong in front of your team. And you're just exhausted. And I know that many of you are like me, you haven't had what resembles a day off in a long time. And so what I'm going to do here when I finish this call is I'm going to go get in my car, unplug my phone, and spend tomorrow with my family and not do anything unless it's absolutely necessary, because it's been quite a long time since I've had that. And so as some of you right now, it's a little bit like when you're on the airplane and the oxygen mask drops, they say put your own on first before you try to help the person sitting next to you. Some of you right now, I just need to tell you, you got to put your oxygen mask on. You got to unplug somehow, watch something stupid on TV, go for a walk with your spouse, go play a game with your kid. Just disconnect your mind for a little bit, because you're not going to be good to anybody unless you take care of yourself. So I want to beg you to do that. I've got some wrap-up thoughts to come back to at the end. But what I want to do is I want to go ahead and toss it over to Tom, who's been assembling your questions, and then we'll walk through some questions specific to you, and then we'll spend some time wrapping up. Tom?
Hey, thanks so much, Craig. Really appreciate that, especially the end, in giving some vulnerability, authenticity, the reality of what it means to lead in times of pressure, in times of crisis, as well as just great leadership resource and material, I think, for all of us as we're walking through this time and talking about tiers of effectiveness. I think all of us could look and use that as a framework for how we can lead better and how we can level up our leading specifically. Got some great questions that came in. We're going to begin to bounce them out to you and let you respond to them. First is from Adam from Canada.
Mm-hmm.
What's your highest priority in a time of crisis? What's your highest priority in a time of crisis?
Well, I think, if you're asking me as a pastor, I'd have to say, Adam, the very first thing that happened when we made the decision on Saturday at 1:00 not to meet in physical locations, and our first service was Saturday at 4. So what we did is we had 3 hours to pivot from planning to meet physically in person to meeting online. And so that was my first priority, was how do we minister to people and bring the meat of what we're called to do to people digitally. Then our church, interestingly enough, we didn't realize this, but we created a church online platform. And what we realized is we had built a boat before it started to rain. Essentially, we'd built the ark. And now we had, I think I heard today, there have been 18,000 churches that have signed up to use the church online platform. So if you can imagine onboarding that many, we've taken tons and tons of staff members and had to redeploy them. And what we're seeing is that's a top priority for us, because at this point, it's not just how do we do church, but how do we help thousands of churches do church. And to be quite honest, our expenses in that one category, they're multiple times now. And so in a time we should be cutting back financially, we are spending way more money. But what we're doing is we're saying we have to reallocate resources because that's top priority for us. If you take it out of just my industry, and if you're saying kind of during a crisis like this, what's top priority, what I would do is I would just say having current and real information and making the necessary decisions in the moment. That's what's so important, is, again, what's right now. And I think what happens, I see so many people trying to project, what are we going to do late April? And again, as a leader, what I'm trying to do is say what's right based on what we know today, what's right for this moment. And I think all of you, in whatever business you have, those things should be really clear. Just don't let all the other energy take you away from those things. And again, what I'm seeing just in the church world is hundreds and hundreds of ideas that add small value, not a lot of value. I see a lot of my friends spending the day on Instagram Live talking to 38 people. Like, come on, man, let's think about the 400 you have in your church, or let's think about the tens of thousands you could reach elsewhere. Let's not sell it for 38 people. Let's not do things that just impact a few. Let's do the things that impact the most. If for you, it might be what brings the most revenue, or what creates the most margin, or what can we shut down and eliminate that creates some financial stability. And so hopefully you can find those things. Tom, I don't want to talk too long, so let's deal with another question.
Nope, very helpful, Craig, especially as you kind of are fleshing out what you talked about with regard to seeing needs, responding quickly, and still creating value around that. Next question is, how do we care for people and extend compassion while still needing them to move our business forward and do the hard work through the season? They said this. They said, I'm running an online business with a team of 150 plus people across the nation. Life does not stop in this pandemic. It changes, but doesn't stop. So how do you do that in extending compassion while still needing them to move the business forward and do the hard work through this season?
So I'm assuming the 150 people are employees, perhaps?
Yeah, I would get that too.
Yeah, so I would just say, the fact that you're asking that question means a lot. And what I would do is I would start every bit of communication with a you-centered message rather than a me-centered message or a business-centered message, which is kind of like a little bit what I started today, is just trying to acknowledge that you as leaders, you're carrying a weight that other people don't understand. And that's not a strategy. It's just, I know that about you and I care about you in that way. So what I would do with those 150 people is I would just start with, and just however their life is different now, maybe they're working from home and they weren't before, just say, I know that it's kind of crazy. And if you talk to enough of them, you can create some language around what they're going through. Like, some of you thought it was going to be great to be with your kids all the time, and now you want to trade your kids for toilet paper, and so you kind of acknowledge it's kind of difficult and speak directly to those things. And then what you can do is you can talk about what you know is important to them. And also you can say something like, what I know is important to you is you want to feed your family, and you want to make sure to continue to have insurance, and you want to continue to make your house payment or your pay your bills or whatever. And so what we're going to do is we're going to work together here. We're going to make some changes. And so what you're doing is you're not saying, I need you to help keep my business afloat, but instead what you're saying is we're going to work together to continue to help you meet your goals. So the biggest thing is going to be in all communication, we want to be you-centered, not me-centered. You focused, not us focused. It's not you keep my business floating, but it's I'm here to do everything I can to help you continue to be successful, to meet your goals, to have your family in a good place, to stay healthy. When we do this together, we all end up in a better place. So I'm so glad that you're asking the question. My gut is trust your instincts. If you're asking the question, you really do care. So whatever you feel like is right is probably right because you care. So to have confidence in that. Tom, let's look at another one.
Yep, great, Craig. You're talking about 800 employees at Life Church, 34 different sites. Very practical question because you're probably doing a lot of video conferencing. Any tips for making video conference meetings more meaningful for the participants?
Okay, question is, any tips to make video conferencing more meaningful? This is going to be really embarrassing, but I have an office team of 4 people, and they were meeting today, and all I did is I walked in and I danced, and then I walked out. Sounds really, really stupid, and it probably is, and most of you wouldn't want to do that, and it would be out of character if you did, but what I did is I just tried to bring a little personality into it and just leave. And so in a time like this, and interestingly enough, the meeting that my office team had was one my assistant called, and she called it a hangout. And so what they did is they weren't they weren't making a lot of decisions, they weren't doing a whole lot of content, but they missed each other, and so they had a hangout. What I would do is give yourself permission to get outside of we're just meeting to make decisions. What you could do is you could do a 30-minute lunch together. We get together, turn on your favorite music loud, everybody can hear it, and try to make it as social as you can, because the trajectory of everything is towards serious and everything is toward business. And, you might start off the meeting by asking what's the weirdest thing that happened with your kids at home, whatever it is. But just get into their world. As far as the technology, look what we're doing now. We're talking to thousands of people from one place. It's all very, very possible. It's very personal. I am looking at a camera right now, but what I'm visualizing is with everything in me, I'm trying to picture you being worried about making payroll, you being worried about your families, and it's personal to me. There's only a camera in my room, but to me, I literally can feel you out there. And if you can just get to that place to where you feel them on the other side, what they're going through, your empathy, your compassion is going to come through. My biggest piece of advice is be efficient with their time. Don't waste their time. Be structured in what you're trying to do. At the end of your meeting, if you don't have a so what are you doing? Here's who does what and when, the basics of a meeting. And then at this time, I'd work to have a little bit more fun because we're all so stressed out. And so add some kind of value to it to make it a little bit more relational.
Yeah, very helpful. Sorry we didn't have any video of you dancing to drop in there, Craig. Maybe next time.
Maybe next time. We
protect
that stuff quite passionately here. You can't. That doesn't get out.
I'm sure. Turn into a GIF. Let's talk about change leadership. And this is from Linda from Ontario, London, Ontario. So some of my team resist change at the best of times and are now struggling with how rapidly our situation is evolving. How can I support them?
Okay, so Linda, let's start with this. Let's start with, I would kind of invite you to think differently about change. You might want to change the way you think about change. And according to the way Tom read your question is, my people resist change. What I would say is this, people don't dislike change. They don't like the way we try to change them. So when you think about it, people change their haircut, they change their shoes. They like to change where they live. They like to change what they eat sometimes, go to different restaurants, read different books. They'll pay money to have someone help them change, help me lose weight, help me get in shape, help me learn Taekwondo. So people don't really hate change. They hate the way we try to change them. So what we do is think a little bit more about this. During this time, what we want to do is we want to try to help people see why staying here is not acceptable. Meaning, if we stay the same, then our future is not whatever. And so we want to create to help people see why we're not going to stay here or stay the same. And then when we're going to go somewhere, what we're going to do is we're going to help them understand why this is better. And anytime you change, you're going to have three different groups. You're going to have your critics, you're going to have your advocates, and you're going to have your bystanders. What the why does is it speaks to the critic, and if there's a rational critic, the why disarms that critic. If there's an advocate, the why, it actually empowers your advocate to have a talking point. If there's someone that's neutral or a bystander, the why can actually motivate that person to now become an advocate. So it's going to be big on this is why it's not acceptable that we don't change. Now we're going to go over here. Here's why we need to go over here. And the why should help move people along. And then what I would just try to suggest, Linda, too, is on the other side of this, when things settle down, create a culture that doesn't resist change but embraces it. Meaning, we just kind of tell people here all the time is that the only thing that's certain is things are going to change. And so if you use that language a lot, then change becomes something we're not afraid of, we're not threatened by, but we actually embrace. This is kind of who we are. If we're a culture that doesn't change well, we die quickly because the world is changing so fast around us. So as leaders, what we have to do is we have to create a culture that really does embrace change. We don't improve without change. We don't get better without change. And so I would just say, let's work on creating a culture over time that does embrace it. And the why is the key to empowering a team to make the move.
Hey, very helpful, Craig. Thanks. Here's a question that came out straight out of your talk. What systems were you using before COVID-19 that are now being maximized? So systems that proved to be good before, but now they're great. Mm-hmm. Anything like that?
So what systems did we use before? Well, our ability to do church in 34 locations now translates to doing church in tens of thousands of locations, meaning in people's homes or wherever they are. So the deliverable via technology was good. Also, just being able to work remotely and be an organization that's not in one place. It's not easy. It's doable, but it takes time to learn how to communicate. That worked well. Driving culture into places that I'm not is something that we as a team had to learn how to do, or not just me, but where our leaders aren't, is we kind of learned how to do that. As far as some systems of communicating, the email list is now as important as ever before. Some things we just do, we're doing a lot of video communication. So tonight, like at 7 p.m. Central Daylight Time on Facebook Live and YouTube Live, I'm doing a 30-minute devotional. And so we're just taking content that we would have used otherwise, we're pushing it out. The leadership podcast, in fact, the content that I delivered today is something that I recorded yesterday that will come out both on the Global Leadership Network podcast and then on mine as well. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to take any content we have and we're putting it into different places. So then on the other hand, there's about 1 billion systems that are now obsolete, meaning everything that had to do with gathering physically, those are gone. And so I'm not sure that's a good answer to your question, but what we want to do is whatever we are as an organization, what is a system? A system is how things get done. And we want to be, to create systems, kind of our thing is this. What we want to do is we want to be really clear on what's expected, and then we want to reward it whenever it's done and correct it when it's not. And here's what happens. If you're clear, we want this, and you reward people like good job, or you get paid more, or you get celebrated when they do it, and correct them when they don't, your people create systems. I'm not a great systems creator. What I am is great at communicating expectations and celebrating when you do it, or holding you accountable when you don't. And then your people create the system. So right now, what you're going to want to do with your team is be really clear on what's the win, be really clear to celebrate when they do it, and then when they don't, be sure and hold them accountable. And then they're going to create new systems right now that'll help propel you forward.
Yeah. Excellent, Craig. Very helpful, too, as you talk about navigating crisis. This question says, if you have a business or service that legitimately can help people in this crisis, how can I ask for the sale without coming across as taking advantage? Said, I'm giving free services online every day, and I've reduced my rate as much as I possibly can to not take advantage of people. Mm-hmm. But how can this person kind of navigate in this situation?
Yeah, well, I think it's admirable that you're willing to give a discount and you have a service that obviously does help people. So hopefully it'll sell itself. In other words, if you've got something that adds value to my life and you've discounted it, people still need things. They need product, they need help, they need coaching. And so this, if I need chicken, I'm still willing to pay for it. I'm willing to pay more for it. I'm willing to pay more for toilet paper right now if I could find some. And so if you've got a really valuable product that helps people, I wouldn't be afraid of asking for the sale at all. Because if you truly believe it helps people, then they won't have any hesitation in paying for it. The economy is still moving, and I think you can really kind of try to communicate your heart, which is this is a product we've offered for a long time, or a service or consulting, whatever. And because of this, what we want to do is we are stripping it down to as low as we can to put this value into your hands. And then I would just say, if you find it helpful, let's do this. And it's just, that's not offensive to anybody. We still pay for things that we value. And so don't let this talk you out of closing the sale when you're adding value to people's lives.
Good. This question says, we're taking every precaution to keep our employees safe. Half of our team appreciates it. The other half thinks that it's overkill and is having trouble relating.
Yep.
What's the best way to lead when the employees or staff is so divided in their acceptance of the pandemic?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say we faced something similar at the very beginning. And so if you kind of track with us, I can't remember the days exactly, but I think it was Tuesday of last week in where I live. It was really relatively safe, but it was increasingly becoming obvious that this is a growing problem. So Tuesday, we were like full speed in our office. And then we realized, okay, if someone gets sick, that's a whole floor that could be, 150 people could be quarantined. Oh my gosh. And then their families or whatever. And we're being maybe we're not being wise. So we made a decision for the team to work from home. And it was kind of 50-50. It's like, thank you, now we're safe. And the other part was kind of like, why are we doing this? And so what we did is we were really, really clear and just walked it through. Okay, so we have, 300 or 400 children that we take care of in our staff childcare. If one kid gets sick, all the workers and all the families then are quarantined. That's not a good day. If someone on a campus team gets sick, then that whole campus team is out and quarantined, and so are their spouses. If someone on my floor gets sick, that's 200 people that are quarantined. Oh my gosh. And so what we did is we said, none of us, and we've just acknowledged, none of us want this. I don't want to work from home. I'm missing you all. But because we care for you, because we care for your family, even though everything we do is not going to be ideal, this was the decision that we made that we felt like was best. And so I want to thank you for being flexible. Thank you for having a good attitude. Thank you for making the best of wherever you are. And so you just kind of lead through it. And if you give them real clearly the how you got to the decision, they're more likely to buy into it. And then tell them, thank you for being a part of it. And then tell them, we don't like it. None of us like it. That's the part when I'm talking about telling the truth is like, I don't want this. There is no perfect decision we can make right now. If we continue to work, we're vulnerable. If we send you all home, it's not ideal. It was not a real clear-cut decision. We got together to err on the side of caring for you and making sure you might have an 80-year-old mom who, if she got it from you, wouldn't live. We're thinking about her. We're thinking about your children. And so you just kind of explain it like that. And most reasonable people will go, okay, that makes sense. And the fact that you don't like it and I don't like it means we don't like it together, but we're making the necessary adjustments together to be wise. And so that's the kind of tone when I'm talking about speaking directly into what they're thinking. That's how you lead. You don't lead like it's going to be great and I expect all of you to buy into this. No, none of us like this. It's a real pain and it's horrible. But hey, if we all go down, we shut this business down, we got no revenue, you got no jobs. And so this is the decision why we made it, in order to really protect your family, to guard you all, to help you stay employed, because we care about you.
Great illustrating on that, communicating empathetically. Thanks, Craig. This is from Richard in Salisbury, North Carolina. He said, I appreciate your vulnerability. To what degree of vulnerability would you say is right to share with our congregations or employees?
Yeah, Richard, great question. I think based on the time, we'll probably wrap this question up, Tom, and then I'll do a quick wrap up and then you can take it over. But Richard, I would say this, that strategic vulnerability is going to be really important. And what I would say is you have to be wise. For example, I'm just going to just be real straight with you. 14 days in quarantine, where it was a strict quarantine, meaning I didn't see anybody. It's not like the quarantine now where people are posting like, I'm playing games with my kids and I'm eating takeout Chick-fil-A. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like I could be dangerous to everybody. I'm like one of the first people potentially carrying this to my state, and it was just massive fear. I got so low and so depressed. I felt like the walls were caving in on me. I'm an extrovert, and I had really deep, dark thoughts. And so what I can do is, to the church, I can say some of that, but I want to be real selective how I say it. And to our staff, I mean, if I'm telling you guys this, leader to leader, it takes every bit of what I have to stand up and lead strong. And then I go home and I want to cry because I'm grieving the same things you're grieving. I'm grieving the fact that I'm 52. I've worked really hard to build something and it may not come back the way I wanted it to. I'm grieving, I'm thinking about 800 staff members, like, what do I do to keep them all employed? And the weight is just so heavy. And so what you want to do, Richard, I think is kind of a calculated strategic vulnerability that if you fall apart in front of them, that's not good. But if you don't empathize with them and hurt with them, that's not good either. And so what you want to do is you want to be always collected, but you want to be vulnerable enough to say, I don't know what's going to happen. And just like you, my retirement went way down, I lost a lot in the market, like a lot, and I'm hoping it'll come back, but I know you're feeling that too. And just like you, it's really tough at home because our kids now everybody's homeschooled, and I've got 6 kids, they're all homeschooled. They're like, now everybody's nerds like us, and so you can kind of empathize with them, and you can just say, there are times when I wake up and I'm afraid. And I get nervous, and the but's really important, is you have to hit the but, and you can tell them whatever is appropriate, but what I know is, and then you just tell whatever's true for you. I'm thankful that we have amazing people. We have some of the best leaders around, and our leaders will respond. Or you can say, if you're a person of faith, but I'm thankful that our God wasn't surprised by this, and and then you can talk about your faith. And so I think you want to be vulnerable because you have to connect. You don't want to just connect with their head, you want to connect with their heart. But at the same time, don't fall apart, cry uncontrollably, run out of the room, and then don't talk about it for 3 weeks. And I think I'm being a little bit overstated there. But strategically, appropriately vulnerable with a posture of confidence that we will get through this. And so it's empathy, and yet it's confidence. And those two things tend to work really well. I'll wrap up with some thoughts real briefly. And what I just want to say is, if you've noticed, I went kind of through this whole thing and really didn't talk much about layoffs because that's just such a hard thing. And I know some of you will have to make those decisions and you'll have to lay some people off. Some of you, unfortunately, in your role, you might be laid off. And I just want to kind of tell you that give yourself permission to step fully into that pain. Don't feel bad when you hurt really badly about that. You should only worry if you don't feel bad. And that's one of the hardest things that we do. And that's going to be happening for a lot of people right now. Don't feel like you failed the people, because there was just no way that everybody could see this coming. And just communicate your heart as much as you can. Some businesses won't make it. I'm projecting, unfortunately, some churches may not be able to weather, 3 or 4 weeks without any sort of real income, and some boats don't float in that. If you find yourself in a place where something that you're leading goes down, I just want to remind you what you do have still is, if you're a person of faith, you still have your faith. If you're a person who's healthy, you still have your health. If you haven't gone crazy yet, you still have mental sanity. You still have your brain. You still are capable. Some of the most successful leaders in the world are those who've emerged after something did not succeed. I think it was Zig Ziglar who said, failure is never a person, it's an event. But it's not a person. If something goes down, don't see yourself as a failure. If you're scared, hey, welcome to the party, man. We're all scared. Just remember, and again, forgive me if I'm overstepping my grounds with faith, but I believe you're where you are because you were chosen to be where you are. And you're the person who's right to lead through this. You don't have to know it all. You just have to show up and make the wisest decisions based on the knowledge that you have today. You will not get it all right. That's okay. None of the leaders get it all right. But if you stand up and you're just really honest, and you are as confident as you can be based on what you know, and you say, we're going to make the best decisions we can. Let's try to do everything we can to help your life, your calling, your ministry, your mission, your family be successful in this. And we're going to make all decisions with that in mind. Or it's to help create value for our customer or whatever it is. It's not, I'm trying to save myself, but we're trying to create value. We're trying to create ministries, whatever it is for other people. If you keep that straight, and leadership's not about you, but it's about the people you lead, they're going to feel that from you, and you can lead them through it. This is going to take it's going to take some crazy courage. It's going to take some really difficult decisions. You're going to second guess yourself every single day. I know I am. But just recognize you're chosen for this, and we will get through this. Somewhere in my journal, I'll be looking back to this day, 2020, and I'll say, I'll remember when, and we got through this. Keep that in mind. If you don't mind, what I'd like to do, and then I'll hand it back to Tom, is obviously I'm a pastor, and that just never seems to go away. I'd like to pray for you, and I just want to say I know that not everybody shares the same faith that I have. Some have different faiths, and some don't even know how to spell faith. That's fine. If that's offensive to you, you can just log off right now. I don't want to push anything in on you, but I would feel irresponsible not praying for you because I know the weight that you feel. So I'm going to give you about 12 seconds more to click off if you want to. And as I'm drawing this sentence out a little bit extra just to give you time to do that, I'm going to pray, and then Tom, I'll hand it back to you. So, Father, thank you for every leader from Canada and from the U.S. that took an hour or so just to log on today. I know they're here not so much because they're looking for an opportunity to grow and expand, but most of them are trying just to survive, how to make good decisions today. And I pray, God, for confidence that those who know you can call on you, and that when we ask for wisdom, you give wisdom. And so I pray for wisdom for these leaders. And God, I know that they're feeling more weight than than everyone else that would be more in a normal situation, God. And I pray, God, that you would help build their faith and give them perspective that this is something that we will overcome, we will endure. And on the other side of this, some things may be better, some things may not be better, but God, we will be stronger, and we will be wiser, and we will move on. I pray, God, for provision for the businesses and the ministries in surprising ways. I pray for innovative ideas. I pray, God, that when we're sucked down into the problems, that every now and then you'd help us rise above them and give us eyes to see any opportunities that are practical, that are financial, or most importantly, God, that are missional to help serve others. I pray, God, for every leader that's online with me right now, that they would find confidence somehow in you, that you would empower them, God, to make decisions that would benefit their people and be a blessing around this world. God, as we draw near to you, we thank you that you'll draw near to us. And we just say, God, we need you now. We need you now. Help us to lead well, to represent you well. God, to have faith and to make a difference in what we do. Bless these leaders, God. Give them strength. Give them wisdom. Give them your heart, God, to make a difference. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thanks so much, Craig. Thanks for helping us to be able to grow in our leadership. And that's critical, especially during these challenging times. For those of you that want to go back and see this again, it's going to be available with video on demand for the next 3 days until midnight on Saturday, March 28th. Craig gave us a lot of content, a lot of great resource. I know you're going to want to go back and be able to listen through it again and kind of reflect on many of the things that were there. We also have additional resources on our website at globalleadership.org. Would love to have you visit there. Dozens and dozens of things that can help you during this time to, again, level up your leadership in times of challenge. Also, we'd invite you, as you're at globalleadership.org, to be able to look about the Global Leadership Summit that's coming up in August, and would love to have you join us there in providing other opportunities for you to be able to help grow your leadership as well. We thank you for joining us. Thank you for being part of this conversation, for asking questions. We encourage you to, as Craig shared, have courage in your leadership, to be able to lead strong and to lead well. Hey, thanks so much for being a part of this. We're going to hang on and kind of move into chapter 2 with church and ministry leaders. Know even a lot of you that are business leaders also are engaged in ministry in your church, and it's challenging during these times. And Craig, you're fully aware of that too. I want to kind of lead off with a question in this section that says, what is the unprecedented opportunity that the church has right now? What is that from your perspective and in your thinking?
Well, I think, Tom, right now, obviously, people are, when people are hurting, they're typically more open. And in any time of tragedy, any time of crisis, they have needs that if we can meet the needs, then they'll often be more open to why we're meeting the needs. Sometimes people meet needs just because they're, have a good heart. But as followers of Jesus, we're going to meet needs because we believe we're the hands and feet of Jesus. And so I think it's pretty obvious that mobilizing our churches and communicating with them in ways to help encourage them to be others-oriented. For example, just to tell you what I'm doing tonight in my little 7 p.m. Central Time devotion, is I took Philippians chapter 2, and I'm talking about attitude. I try to bait people, because I know there's a lot of bad attitudes right now, and I took Philippians 2:5 that says your attitude should be like that of Jesus, and kind of baited them and said, what was his attitude? Well, he was full of faith, he was full of love, he was full of grace. That's obvious. But if you look at the context of Philippians 2, it starts off, and Paul said, consider others better than yourself. Do not look to yourself as being better, but consider others. And so then Paul talks about Jesus giving his life for others. And so the whole context is you should be others oriented. So I gave people 7 ways to do things, 7 days of 7 ways of being others oriented, and just gave them real specific assignments to serve somebody, to give something specifically, to post about your faith, to invite someone to church online. I gave them 7 things like that. And all I'm trying to do is help them mobilize them to be outward focused. So in the churches, we want to minister to the people, but we don't want to be just our little church thing. Last week, my message was on 1 Thessalonians about when Paul said, your faith is going everywhere. And he basically said, why? There's 3 reasons. He said, because of your love, because of your faithfulness, and because of your enduring hope. And so I said, what are we? We are faith spreaders, we are love givers, and we are hope dealers. And so what I'm trying to do is mobilize the church and say, hey, let's not just feel like this is bad because we can't meet. Let's recognize there are people who are in need, and let's leverage this to take the message out. So the big strategic thing is people are open. They also have needs that we can meet in the name of Jesus. And then I think hopefully whenever the world grows darker, the light shines brighter.
Thanks, Craig. Very helpful as we think about being externally focused in the church environment. So next question is, what about Easter? So how we think it could be again online, first time ever for most of us. How's Life Church approaching that, and how should other churches respond?
So again, Tom, I'm week to week, man. Like I'm telling you, I had when I was in quarantine, I wrote my Easter message, and it was done and ready to go. It's scrapped as of now, and I have this weekend's prepared, and then I'll do next weekend, and then I'll think about Easter. So I'm not making any I just don't know. In my mind, again, like I said earlier, I'm thinking that we won't be meeting physically. In my mind, I'm not planning on until sometime late summer. That way I'm not devastated if Easter doesn't happen. So in my mind, I'm preparing in that direction, meaning things are going to continue to be challenging. If I've got some kind of surprise and we're back meeting, if we do get to meet for Easter, which I think is highly unlikely, but if we do, it ain't gonna be a lot of people coming because they're gonna be too afraid. So it's not going back to normal on Easter, no matter what anybody's thinking. And I hate to be, that's realistic, that's not pessimistic. That's just, even if the doors open back up and in the United States, President Trump says, you guys can meet, or in Canada, whatever the standard is that gives you the freedom to go, churches aren't gonna be full on Easter because people are too afraid. What do? I think we're gonna make the most of whatever it is. You could get creative. You could encourage your people, hey, dress up in your own house and watch it there. Let's not just be in our pajamas today, but let's put on our Easter best. You could do something like that. You could, I don't know what it is. But honestly, again, it's week to week for me. I'm not even thinking that far in advance because I don't know what the mood is gonna be.
Yeah, appreciate that. So there's a lot about creating community, how in this online live stream environment, you do that really well at Life Church. What are some of the things you do to create community?
So what we've done, Tom, is we're giving all of our campuses, what was interesting is, so all those staff members are now working from home, their jobs have changed, and so a lot of them have a little more time, and so they're ideating, they're coming up with lots of ideas. And my first question was, they're doing all these online things. Is that the best strategy? Because I'm trying to do this one big Wednesday night and a big weekend, and they're doing all these little bitty blah, 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 blah every day with youth, with, their host team huddles they're gathering, they're doing small groups. Should we stay focused and try to be big? And what my theory is, and again, this could change, is they're not going to have a personal relationship with me because they're in different states. What I want to do is I want to give the campuses permission to go ahead and have, in that category, let's just run wild. And make it as personal and as intimate as we can. So if you want to have a worship night in Owasso, Oklahoma, and you want to do a social meetup in Omaha, Nebraska, and you want to do something different in Keller, Texas, we're going to give them freedom to do that and let them try to meet the needs of their community. So some of the things we're doing, a lot of Facebook Live events, a lot of YouTube Live events, some church online events, a lot of worship type events, some 5-minute prayer times, some short devotion times, some funny stuff where for the students, they're getting together and shaving people's heads when they don't win the game, and then they're bringing a devotion. They're taking small groups and they're meeting in groups after church, before church, midweek, and then they're taking their serving teams a lot of times and saying, hey, let's go ahead and meet with our serving team, but let's just all do it online. And at this point, my theory is let's give people more freedom and more autonomy to keep it as intimate as they can, because my goal is not to have them connect with me, my goal is to have them connect with each other. And so I would say, at the churches out there, and again, let me just say this, don't be stupid and spin it up. If you're a single site church and you're doing 43 different things, you're probably going to weaken your one thing. If you're a multi-site church like we are, we're going to focus on the one or two big things. I am giving them more freedom because I feel like I'd rather it be local and personal to that campus rather than me directing them as how to do it.
Hey, good. Thanks. This question comes from Princeton, British Columbia. What can our church do in response to our community, particularly in response to first responders?
Mm-hmm. So, first of all, the question is really, really good. What do we do in our community? And I would try to answer this in a few ways. One of the things to do is to think about there are people that are going to give less because they're losing their jobs. There are also people that want to give more, and a lot of people, or at least a significant portion of people, will want to give more, and they don't know where to give. And so what you can do is you can help them see that if you give through our church in British Columbia, we actually are strategically picking the best partners in the community to make a difference. So what we're not trying to do is we're not trying to meet a lot of individual needs because there's too many of them. What we're trying to do is put resources toward the best local strategic partners that we have, and we're trying to communicate that with our people. So we're kind of like a mutual fund of ministry. If you give to the church, you're going to be helping us reach people at Church Online. We've got free resources for churches all over the world. and we're working with our local partners. And so it's like a mutual fund. So you can kind of tell your people in giving that way. As far as first responders go, you certainly can't have them all come up and pray for them on Sunday. So I don't know what you could do. If I'm trying to come up with ideas in my mind, I might deliver groceries or essential needs to their place of business. If that's not too invasive with touching things, I would probably post on social media so at least the first responders in your church can know you care. I would pray for them digitally, and so you're kind of giving them that sense of showing them that you care. Anything physical you can do to help meet their needs, or at least to support them. The problem we have is we just can't go see people as much as we could. So as much as you can verbally, and then any way you can physically meet their needs, I think they're going to appreciate that, and it's going to mean a lot to them.
Yeah, I think it'll be very, very meaningful, Craig. Thanks. Let's have this be our last question, and that is, what tips do you have for leaders for self-care while navigating through a crisis?
Yeah, that's a great question. So how do you self-care? I would say several things. Is sleep really, really matters. Like when I was in quarantine, one of the things I did is I got up early every day so I didn't get lazy. I got dressed even though I wasn't going to see anybody. I took a shower and shaved. So in my mind, I was saying I'm kind of healthy and strong. I'd work out in my room. I tried to eat good. I limited myself to one show a day. Some days I didn't even watch any TV, so I'm not like vegging out and becoming weak, whatever. I think some of the things you're going to want to do would be the same for you as a leader. If all you're doing is digesting bad news on TV, it's going to really, really mess you up. So you want to expose yourself to some people that are more optimistic, and they are out there, meaning this thing could be really bad or things could recover relatively quickly. The economy could bounce back. So I want to expose myself not just to more sensational bad news that does tend to sell on the media, and I'm not taking a shot at the media. I'm not like anti-media, but bad news is generally more interesting and talked about than good news. And so I'd make sure I'm around some good news. I'd make sure, force yourself to sleep, eat great. Exercise matters so much. Like I'm too busy to exercise, so I'm finding really short spurts to go and get my heart rate up. It releases endorphins in your body. Anytime you can get out in the sunshine, get some vitamin D, that kind of stuff. Your prayer life matters a lot. And then I just find some people that when you're with them, you feel better after you've been with them than when you're with someone else. Like Tom, we would just talk a little when he was in quarantine in Germany, which, dear God, I was so glad I was in my home and not stuck wherever he was in a home in Germany. But he was a very positive friend who helped me get through it. And you want some people like that. There are some people in your life that are energy drainers, and there's some that are energy givers. You want to make sure you're putting yourself around some energy givers right now.
Great. Thanks so much for this time, Craig. Thanks for incredible amounts of wisdom, helping us be able to grow in our leadership, because we said at the beginning, leadership matters, and it matters more than ever right now. And especially to you, church and ministry leaders, continue to stay grounded in your faith. Continue, as Craig shared, to communicate well, and also let your courage be contagious. And so thanks for this opportunity. Again, more resources, especially Craig's resources, are at globalleadership.org. Find out how to take advantage of those. We're continuing to pray with you. We're continuing to stand with you, and we're continuing to walk with you during this time. And we're trusting for God's leading as we continue to share the love of Christ in our world. So lead strong and lead well and lead like Jesus. God bless you. Thanks so much.